You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the Enterprise first season episode, Oasis. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel is Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Father Corey is on an away team, so it's just going to be Jimmy and I today, but Father Corey will be back. Folks, remember to like The Secrets of Star Trek on Facebook, where we're at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. Retweet us on Twitter, where we're at SQPN, and leave us comments wherever you find us. We love to hear from you, and this episode we have some great listener feedback that's based on the comments people leave behind where they find us online, so please do so. I want to tell you about another show on the StarQuest Network you are sure to enjoy called The Secrets of Star Wars. You can find that wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/Star Wars. So, but this time we're talking about Oasis. And Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens?
This week, a space trader tells Captain Archer and the gang about a haunted spaceship that's crashed on a planet that they can use for spare parts. When they get there, they find the spaceship, and it does appear to be haunted. Despite the fact there are no detectable life signs, the ship has a crew. They claim that they were attacked above the planet 3 years ago, crashed, and have been hiding out ever since. But they seem strangely hesitant to accept the Enterprise's offer of rescue, or to at least help the ship with repairs. But they do eventually accept the repair help. The mystery deepens as Enterprise discovers evidence that they actually crashed 22 years ago, and they weren't attacked but had an accident. Also, their hydroponics bay isn't nearly big enough to provide food for all the crew. Eventually, it emerges that 22 years ago, the ship had an accident in an ion storm and crashed. The only survivors were the ship's engineer and his daughter, and when he discovered he couldn't repair the ship, the engineer holographically recreated the crew to provide companionship. He doesn't want to leave the planet, but Trip Tucker and the gang convince him his daughter needs a better, broader life. So they give him the parts he needs, and he uses his emergency holographic crew to make repairs. The end.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, like, I know we've had the Doctor before this, the emergency medical hologram, but I wonder if this inspired a little bit of the Picard season 1 and 2. With
Rios' ship.
Rios' ships, yes.
Yeah, his holographic crew was so underused. It was a neat concept they introduced in season 1, and then they basically abandoned it in season 2.
I know. Like so much unfulfilled promise. Well, speaking of Star Trek Picard, one of the guest stars from season 2, or recurring characters in season 2, was Annie Wershing, who has her very first, not only her first guest appearance on Star Trek, but her very first TV role in this episode. She plays the
daughter,
character.
Liana.
Yeah, she was just 24, and as we mentioned before, she passed away from an illness recently. So may she rest in peace. But
who did she play in Picard?
She was the Borg Queen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so under all the makeup, it's hard to
the
recognize.
Season 2 Borg Queen. Okay.
Yeah. So. So that's it. You know, she. I think she also did at least one more appearance in Star Trek, but I'm not sure. I didn't look it up. But another prominent guest star in this one that we would all recognize is Renee Auberjonois, who played Odo in Deep Space Nine. Plays her dad in this one
with much less makeup on.
I'm sure that was much more pleasant for him to be in this one.
I thought his character is a little. Well, at least until the very end, his character felt wasted to me.
Yeah.
Because he's not prominent in the episode. It's just, why have they bothered putting Renee Auberjonois here? And then in the last 5 minutes, he becomes pivotal, and that kind of redeems it. But like, if you're going to haul Renee Auberjonois on screen, I want to see him doing stuff. You know? I don't want it to, he suddenly becomes relevant in the last 5 minutes. I mean, they should have built him up more, given him a more prominent role in most of the episode, but he's in the background.
I know, if you're going to bring a prominent character from a previous series, a star from one of the previous Star Trek series, you got to give him something to do. You got to make it more than just him showing up and wandering around.
It'd be like having George Takei or Walter Koenig in the background of another series playing another character for 40 minutes, and then suddenly he becomes relevant.
Well, and it also kind of gives the story away a little bit, because you know that they're not going to put Rene Auberjonois in this episode unless he's important. And he's for most of it, he's no more important than any of the other holograms that we eventually figured out they're holograms. So it was, I think it was a bit of a mistake. And if they wanted to have him in a series, in an Enterprise episode, they should have found something different for him to do that would have taken advantage of his skills and his recognizability with the audience.
This episode, to my mind, was eminently forgettable, as illustrated by the fact I didn't remember it.
Same here.
And so it's not good. It's not so good you remember it. It's not so bad you remember it. It's kind of so bland you don't remember it. And I have almost no notes on this. Yeah. So this may be a short one for that reason. Well, but it's not unpleasant. It's just there, you got this slowly unfolding mystery. You got lots of little clues being dropped. As soon as they found, so at one point they find, as they're gathering evidence that there's an actual mystery here, they find an escape pod in orbit. Mm-hmm. And when they open the escape pod, it's got a dead guy in it. And Trip Tucker says, "Oh, that's so-and-so. I just saw him on the planet an hour ago." And he's referring to another background character that has not been built up or named on screen in any way.
I couldn't figure out which one it was supposed to be.
Until later when he meets the hologram of the guy. Yeah. And says, "I just saw your body an hour up on the ship. You want to explain that to me?" And that's really the first time this guy is ever singled out. Yeah. So they could have written that better, but by giving the guy something to do and giving him a name before we see his body, something to call attention to him so we'll recognize him, as opposed to every other background character. But then as soon as they open up the pod and it's got a body in it and Trip says, "Oh, I know that guy," I said, "Holographic people."
Right.
And so that was like at the halfway mark. And so I'm waiting for the holographic reveal for the rest of the episode. And it eventually comes.
Right. Well, because it's not the first time they've done something like this in Star Trek. In fact, this story recycles so many elements. Like, it's the cage with Vina. Mm-hmm. There are other episodes of the first season of Enterprise with a haunted ship and, a Trip falling for a girl, although a little creepy. She's a little young for him, but although I do like T'Pol calling him out. that was
good. If she's 24, they're both consenting adults.
I guess. I guess I don't know how old Trip is, but he's not that old. So it recycles so many story elements.
Even if he's 40, I don't care. Once the person is into their mid-20s, their brain is fully formed, they can make their own decisions.
Okay. All right. I'm doing the dad thing. But my main point is they've recycled so many bits of story that it does get lost in the memory a bit, because it doesn't quite stand out from the other ones. Yeah. So I did think the horse trading with the alien scene over dinner,
that was fun.
That was a little bit fun, because apparently they sent out the Enterprise with the expectation that they would trade for what they needed for supplies out there, which I think is an interesting idea.
I got the impression that they'll trade because it's part of their first contact mission. Mm-hmm. But I got the impression that they'd sustained more damage than anticipated, and thus they were in need of parts and were too far from home.
I suppose, although that's kind of the idea is when you get out there, if you get damaged, because presumably in this exploration things will happen, you're going to need to find sources. It reminds me a lot of stories from the Age of Sail here on Earth, where the ships would sail the British Empire ships would sail to the South Pacific, and if they had a broken mast or needed water or food, whatever, they'd have to find it there and trade for it or whatever. Mm-hmm. Another element of the discussion is this. One of the constraints that they put on Enterprise, the series, is this idea that this Enterprise is not the biggest, baddest ship in the quadrant, like all the other Enterprises essentially, claim to be. They have to be more careful. They're more cautious. They're the new guy on the block. And that's one of the things I liked about Enterprise as a series is that constraint, which is different from so much else that we've seen in Star Trek before. So that I think that got brought out in that scene there.
Yeah, I wish they had. I've read some of the behind the scenes stuff about this series, and they had. I mean, the series was fundamentally flawed from the beginning because they didn't realize what the story they needed to tell was. Mm-hmm. They didn't need to give us a gee whiz, we're the new kids on the block, let's go explore story. They needed to give us the founding of the Federation. Right. And they didn't realize that until the very end, and then they botched it. But even given that, they had ideas that would have been much better than what they did. One of the things that they had initially proposed was, okay, we're going to go out in the first season, we're going to start exploring, and the ship is going to get knocked around like crazy, and they're going to barely limp back to Earth in the season finale and need repairs. Mm-hmm. And that would have been much more interesting, watching them patch together an increasingly deteriorating ship. I mean, Ron Moore later did that after this series on Battlestar Galactica. Right. Where you watch the Galactica get progressively worse until by the time you get to the season finale, it is literally falling apart and is making its last possible jump ever. Right. And watching the Enterprise do that would be much more interesting than what they actually did. But then when they got into writing the episodes, they lost track of that season arc. And they were just scrambling to get enough scripts to fill airtime that they weren't able to execute any larger overarching goals. Yeah. That is too bad. It's so much unfulfilled potential. The one thing with the just to cap off the horse trading with the alien there, was the Damar is his name, which is also distracting because wait, I just invested 7 years watching Deep Space Nine, which has a major character named Damar. Damar, yeah, exactly. Remember, he became leader of the Cardassian Empire for a while. Right. Reusing the name like that, yeah, that is unfortunate. But the idea that I suppose it's the willing suspension of disbelief, but the whole idea that alien food would be. Does alien hot pepper have capsaicin in it too? That's that idea, and that aliens would like coffee, the taste of coffee. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. I don't have too much of a problem with that, and this is something I've thought about because back in the 90s there was a rumor, that that at Area 51 they had an extraterrestrial biological entity who liked strawberry ice cream. and that was something that was laughed at, but I thought about it, it's like, no, if their biochemistry is remotely similar to ours, they're gonna use sugars, and now they might or might not be able to digest the sugars we have on Earth. Like here on Earth, all of the sugars you can either have a left or right chirality, which has to do with the direction the molecule rotates, the structural rotation of it. And if memory serves, on Earth, all sugars are right-handed. And so that's what we can digest. We can make glucose out of that. And we're going to be attracted to sugars because it's a source of energy, and we're omnivores. If we were cats, we wouldn't really be able to digest it. We'd be obligate carnivores. And that's why cats don't care about sweet things, because they don't digest them. They don't have the taste receptors to detect sweetness. So if you offer a cat something sweet, it doesn't perceive it as sweet. It perceives it as blah. It's just nothing to it. But humans and canines are omnivores and can eat plants, including sugars. And so we have taste receptors for sugars, and we like sweet things. And if you are an omnivore, you are probably going to have sugars. They may not be right-handed sugars like we have on Earth. So if you're a human, you can digest right-handed sugars. If you go to a planet that has left-handed sugars in its vegetation, it'll taste sweet and it won't hurt you, but you can't digest it. So it's like Planet of the Diet Foods. and I plan to use that in a story someday, maybe. But it actually, you know, strawberry ice cream, that's principally sugars and fats. Fats are flavor enhancers because they trap molecules for taste. So that's what makes the fat in ice cream, makes it taste sweeter and amplifies. Like if you've got strawberry flavoring in it, it's going to amplify the strawberry flavor. So it's an intensified sweet food. And can I imagine an alien liking intensified sweetness? Absolutely, I can imagine that. Their biochemistry would, if they're an omnivore, they would find that attractive too.
That's possible. Although, as I think about it, there are plenty of humans who can't digest various lactose and other things like that. So
yeah. The ability to digest lactose is a recent evolutionary development in humans.
Right.
All mammals are capable of digesting lactose or eating milk when they're infants. But then, because they get weaned by their mamas, most mammals then lose the ability to digest lactose in adulthood because those genes become inactive as you're not getting it anymore. So that gene can turn off. But since humans began the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago and started domesticating sheep and goats and cows, all of which produce milk, various populations of humans began continuing to drink milk beyond infanthood and a recent evolutionary development is various populations, including some on each continent, but primarily in Europe. European humans of European ancestry, basically almost all, will still have the active gene to digest lactose into adulthood.
Interesting. Yeah, it would be an interesting. It's always interesting to me, like in Star Trek, especially. They don't have the time to go into it, but the idea that they can just eat whatever, wherever. Yeah, you know,
that was something. There's a bunch of eating in this episode. We have the initial scene with Damar, then Liana, the girl, brings Trip some kind of squash or something, and then later he meets her in the mess hall, and she's eating ice cream.
Right.
And so we've got a lot of eating, and I just kept wanting someone to whip out a scanner.
Yeah.
Real quick. Just let me do a second check, make sure this is okay with my biochemistry.
Exactly.
I guess we're meant to infer that they do that off screen or something, and they're just not taking the time to show it to us, but I would rather see it.
Yeah.
You know, or at least a little test strip they can dip in it, and if it turns the wrong color, it's like, oh, I better not eat this.
It could be poisonous, acid, it could be anything. Yeah.
But apropos of ice cream, if you wanted to say that Damar or Liana didn't have the gene to digest lactose and they're going to have irritable sensations afterwards,
yes, nicely put.
I'd be fine with that. But that wouldn't mean they wouldn't find it tastes good.
Yes.
Because even people who are lactose intolerant, they still find ice cream tastes good.
Yes, they do.
They just need to take some lactase pills before they can have it.
Yep. One nice treatment here is I feel like Mayweather gets a little bit of a better treatment than he often does in this one. So they've got this ship that they've been told has been crashed that would be a good source for them for salvage, and so they go to this planet and they find it there intact. And Mayweather's like, maybe we shouldn't go down there and, be poking around. And they kind of mock him a little bit, but let's remember.
Well, because he's raised in this space freighter culture and is perceived as superstitious. And Archer even alludes to one of your ghost stories at one point. And he's like, no, there's an apparently okay ship that everyone is dead on.
Yes.
Maybe there's something dangerous down there.
Or we should respect it because it's somebody's last resting place. As someone who was raised in a spacefaring society, culture, that they would probably recognize this sort of thing as need to be respected.
Maybe, but I would tend to go the other way and say if you're from a spacefaring culture where you are on the edge of survival a lot of the time, you're gonna strip those ships.
I suppose. Yeah. I may, or at least you would say, before we strip it, we need to be, respectful of the dead.
Have a prayer service or something.
Yeah. So I did like the fact that he did get that moment there.
Mm-hmm.
I also thought it was funny how the crew was all bluster and joking about ghosts while they were on the Enterprise until they get down there, and then they're all like jumping at shadows and stuff, which I thought was like, we're all bluster until we're in the middle of a ghost situation. Except for T'Pol, who, because apparently Vulcans don't imagine things and don't get the creeps.
Yeah, and they don't have emotions either. So
yeah, I'm calling baloney on that one. Vulcans could be afraid of they could certainly imagine things, because if they can't imagine things, they're not very good scientists, for one thing. But also, they fear. Like, do they let fear control them? Obviously not. But there's still things you'd be afraid of. Otherwise, you're not very good at surviving.
Yeah.
So,
these are just more of the lies Vulcans tell themselves.
Yes, they tell themselves and others. So I alluded to the fact that at one point when they've met Liana and Trip is kind of gaga to the pretty girl, T'Pol reminds Tucker of the time he got pregnant by the Zerillian engineer, and he has his habit of finding cute aliens that he flirts with.
Mm-hmm. I like that she avoided the word pregnant in the writing, because that would have added. Instead, she says, "You ended up carrying her child." Right. Because of their unique physiology, implants the egg in the male, I think is what it was, if I remember correctly. She calls him on it, which is good, because he's kind of Kirkish in this series. He's finding an alien girl in every port. And there is some outrageous flirting between Tucker and Liana, frankly. And Liana is frankly likable. I thought the actress Annie Wershing did a good job. She made this character likable and interesting. I thought the character was hampered a little bit by the writing and all the secrecy they're needing to keep from giving it all away as soon as they do. Mm-hmm. But in terms of fundamental performance, it's like she seemed likable to me. I liked her. Yeah. Yes, I did too. Yeah. There was a possibilities for that character that we didn't get, as deep as, and maybe I think in some ways she salvaged the episode by the character, because it could have been a very bland paint by numbers sort of the pretty innocent alien girl, but she added a little bit of extra to that character. I think that was good. So one thing I didn't like in this is the crashed spaceship thing. Because when they first get in it, within a few minutes, Trip is like, "There's not much wrong with this ship. We could get this flying." And I'm going, "Yeah, have you seen the external shots they gave us? This thing is sitting in a field of plants. Where's the debris trail?" Yeah. If this is a crash landing, I mean, at a minimum, there's even if the ship didn't come apart in the crash, it's going to carve a trail. Have you ever seen what happens when an aircraft crashes? It is even if you've got a supremely strong duranium one that's not going to come apart, it's going to dent the ground. Yeah. Well, 22 years, but yeah. But still, they should have, for the sake of communicating the crash to the audience. Yeah. If it had been 22 years with vegetation growing, then the vegetation would have covered the ship too. Right. They should have shown us, this thing carved a path onto the ground, whereas it looks like it didn't crash at all. It looks like it just sat down. Right. Vertically, with vertical takeoff and landing, without even a runway. And so they should have done something to communicate crash visually, and they didn't. That's true. Right. I mean, yeah, you can explain away all the reasons why they didn't do it, but the fact is from a dramatic storytelling point of view, they should have shown us that it was a crashed ship. Yeah. So, and Reed, doing his job, finds all the holes in the story that Liana has been telling, including no evidence of being shot at, there's no reason that they shouldn't have called for help, the lack of enough food to feed everyone. The lack of call for help is something that I think they could have done a little more with, because it's fair for the human crew to point out it's been 3 years. Whoever attacked them is going to have moved on.
Yeah,
and they should call for help and get some backup from their own people. But they never really explain why they don't, because now we know there's they were never attacked. So when they crashed, why didn't they call for help? I mean, you can argue it's because Rene Auberjonois was guilty as an engineer, but really, that's hard to believe.
And that's the reason you condemn your young daughter to a life of solitude on an alien planet?
Yeah. That's hard to believe. But what they could have done is, when they're still believing the crash story, is someone can point out, okay, it's been 3 years. They should have sent a distress call by now. Someone else, maybe T'Pol, points out, do not assume all species think like humans. It could be that this species has an extra sense of caution, that they're not willing to take the risks. They're not as risk tolerant as you are. And that's why they haven't risked sending a message. Or it could be that they know the species that attacked them are like trapdoor spiders, and will sit out there and wait and wait and wait and wait until they get a signal, and then they'll spring into action. So it could be a difference in the psychology of these aliens or the psychology of the aliens who attacked them, or both.
Right.
And that would have been a reasonable explanation for why they haven't sent a distress signal. And it would have made for an interesting discussion on the show that could point out the differences between human psychology and alien psychologies.
Right. I mean, if it were Klingons wouldn't send a distress signal because it's dishonorable. It shows weakness, or, it could be anything. But yeah it would have been nice to see that. I did like Tucker when Archer calls in Tucker to talk about Liana and the crew. Tucker gets very defensive at first because guilty conscience much.
Archer says, I hear you've been spending a lot of time with Liana. And it's like, I've been a perfect gentleman, sir. It's like, this wasn't about that. We were just wanting to know if you've seen her do anything strange.
I do like them calling him out on that. He knows what he's doing is threading the line.
Well, after getting pregnant from an alien, you would be a little sensitive on that subject.
Right. So we do find out that they crash because Ezral, that's the Rene Auberjonois character, Ezral left his post during the crisis, the accident, to save his baby daughter, who was in a part of the ship that was going to be exposed, or, that she was going to die.
Going to be destroyed, even though we never see this part of the ship and there's no evidence of it being destroyed.
And in fact, he could have been wrong that she was in danger, but he left his post regardless, and has determined that him leaving his post was the reason the ship crashed. Whether right or wrong, that's his own conscience tells him that that was the reason.
Meanwhile, Liana is blaming herself. It's all because of me. He went to rescue me, and that's why everybody died. So,
right.
No, even if that were true, it would all be him, not you.
Yes. Not logical, but understandable that she would do that. So we have this reason why he didn't reach out. We talked about that, like why he didn't send a distress signal, there's also, why doesn't he want to go now? And basically, he says, because this is our home now and we're comfortable here. Yeah, I mean, and there was some logical questions like, well, what happens if Liana gets sick or, has an accident? And are you going to have a holographic doctor? Which is a bit of a nice nod to Voyager. But, which is a good point, because unless he has the knowledge, Ezral has the knowledge to program into the doctor, he can't make a doctor to be a hologram.
He may have, he's clearly got the ability to make simulacra and feed data into them. Mm-hmm. And so presumably their computer system has a medical database that he could feed into a simulacrum.
That would be useful. But it's
not like they're exposed to a lot of infectious diseases,
right?
So any problem they're going to encounter is going to be mechanical. You can deal with surgery.
So the sort of the overarching overarching question is that's a good pun. This overarching question is, do is it enough to live among virtual reality? I mean, that's a sort of a question of our day.
It depends on who you are.
Yeah.
Now, I have some ability to sympathize with Ezreal saying this is home now and I just want to stay here, because I've seen people who have, I have a family member, I won't say who it is, but I have a family, and it's not me, but I have a family member who experienced a tragedy at an unexpected point in life and then became clinically depressed and spent the rest of life living in one house, mostly sitting on the couch watching court TV. And other family members would try to, engage and get stuff done, because if you're living in your house on the couch, you're not taking care of the place, and it's going to degenerate over time. And so other family members would like, let's bring in a maid, and things like that. Is no, don't want anybody here. And so I have encountered people who, especially late in life, may kind of lose the will to engage more broadly. And that could be the case for Ezreal, especially if they made him a little older than he was. Although, again, he's an alien. Who knows, what their life cycle is. They could all be, what was Kess's species? The
Okampa.
The Okampa. They could be like Okampans, and he could be in his last year of life, and he's 5 years old.
Yeah.
So, but in any event, I could kind of sympathize with that perspective. But what is much harder, at least in any normal human culture, especially a Western culture, is sympathizing with, and my daughter gets to stay here with me and continue to live here after my death with no hope of being around other people.
Right.
That's just comes across as extremely selfish and is much harder to justify. So that's a problem. Once the true nature of what's going on is revealed, Ezreal should have agreed more quickly than he did.
Yeah.
To at least letting her go. What I think would have been even more fascinating, though, than what they do. Now, in the first half of the episode, before they find the escape pod, because I don't remember this episode, I'm trying to figure out, okay, so why are they being so resistant? I thought they might be political dissidents. That the reason they don't want to go home is because home is a dystopian place, or they believe it to be a dystopian place, and they're like rebels who, rightly or wrongly, are alienated from their own society, and this is their way of getting away from it. And that I think that would have been interesting. But I'm okay with what they did with the hologram stuff. But then, even though, okay, just give him some parts and let his holographic crew make the repairs, that doesn't help Enterprise. How about we get to strip the ship, and then we take you with us, and we can get you back home to your own society much faster than you could on your own. And you don't have to rebuild the ship or anything like that. And then if I were showrunner, what I would want to do is have them on the show add a couple of new characters that we see for at least a few episodes until we get them back to their home. And that also gives us a reason. It creates a driver for the story, because we need to get we've these people now. That gives us a goal, as opposed to randomly wandering around each episode with no sense of what we're doing. We're going to these people's homes, and they can serve as guides to help us encounter people on the way that we're going to meet. And we can do pre-arrival anthropological interviews with them to understand their culture better. And then we can have an episode where we finally meet with their culture and hand them over, and it can all end nicely, and we have a big mutual, cross-cultural celebration. There's so much you could do there that's better than just, here are some parts, fix it with your crew.
I suppose one of the reasons they wouldn't do that is they didn't want to do Neelix again. because that's kind of
but
a little bit like Neelix.
Neither Neelix nor Lyanna are, neither Ezreal nor Lyanna are Neelix.
No, they're not, thankfully. Speaking of alien crew members that we don't see Dr. Phlox in this one at all, I don't think.
Nope, he gets mentioned, but he gets no lines, so no royalties for you. Sorry, John Billingsley.
So, so they do give them some parts. Instead of getting parts, they're giving parts. They're giving them help to rebuild. Ezreal decides that his daughter deserves more, but the holographic crew is still there, still part of whatever. And they're going to make their way back home on their repaired ship. Although I jokingly put down, so on their way back home, do they get captured by the Borg and Lyanna gets turned into the Borg Queen?
In an alternate reality, maybe.
Yes, that might be it. Interestingly, there were 2 deleted scenes that the Memory Alpha wiki mentions. Nothing fantastic, but just a couple of extra bits of scenes where, let's see, T'Pol and Tucker on the discussion of like her being scared have an extended discussion of fear as a primitive emotion, and whether she's scared of heights or spiders, and she does say that one thing she was scared of was when she discovered the crew was preparing a going away party for that time when she was getting returned to the Vulcans, and she found the idea somewhat frightening, which is kind of a funny thing. And then there was another one that was just when they first met the crew of the crash ship. There was an extended scene there, so nothing too interesting got lost in that.
And I can understand and sympathize her idea of finding a going away party frightening because she's from a very emotionally reserved culture, and appreciation for other people and affection and expressiveness can be very different even in human cultures. I have a friend from a Southeast Asian culture who came to America for college, and she was in Oklahoma and Arkansas, and she was in Arkansas at the time for college, and it's Christmas. It's coming to be Christmas. She's thousands of miles from her home in Southeast Asia. She's going to get invited to a Christmas party. Mm-hmm. And she did, because people in the South, it's like, oh, we've got this visitor here. They don't have any family. It's Christmas. Invite them over,
right.
So she gets invited to a Christmas party, and she's dreading it partly because, she wants to be there, but she knows that Americans hug each other. And in her culture, they don't hug.
Yeah.
They're not huggers. They're not demonstrative in that way. They also don't say, I love you to people. It's given that you love your family members. And so they're not used to hearing things like that. And it's like, if you said it out loud, what's up with this? Are you fatally ill or something? And so she's at the Christmas party, and the hostess is like going down the line of guests and giving everyone a big hug. And my friend is just waiting there, dreading the hug that is coming. And eventually she gets the hug, and it's like, okay, I'm so glad that's over. But now she loves she loves how expressive Americans are. She loves giving and getting hugs and saying I love you and all kinds of stuff like that, but not at the time.
That's funny.
So I can just imagine T'Pol in that situation. If I go to this going away party, they are going to hug me and do things and sing in my honor, and
be all emotional.
Be so embarrassing. Yeah.
Well, your friend should have gone to school in New England. We're God's frozen people. We don't hug. So, all right. So I think, do you have any other notes on this episode before we wrap up?
No, it's very forgettable.
Okay, very good. So I did promise some feedback, so let's get to that now.
You did. Time to pay up.
I pay off my promises. And so our first feedback comes from Sandy, who sent this email, who says, after listening to your podcasts on Picard, I just had to comment on Beverly Crusher. What the heck is wrong with her? She's an intelligent, educated 24th century woman, a doctor and Starfleet officer. Why would she feel the need to keep her son a secret? Her reasons didn't make sense to me. On TNG, she was quite forceful and shared her contrary opinions with the captain and crew members many times. She was pretty outspoken on many occasions, including going against a whole scientific community to champion a Ferengi scientist. That Beverly wouldn't have kept a son secret. They could have come up with a different way to have Picard suddenly have a son. I really enjoyed this season of Picard and also enjoyed listening to your podcast. Thank you, Sandy.
So I'm sympathetic to Sandy's perspective. I also found the characterization of Beverly Crusher as having had a secret son and not telling anybody about it problematic. It does seem like it's out of character for her. I can try to retcon the situation and say, like, maybe they have excessively horrible, generous visitation rights laws and custody laws in the 24th century. So if she let Picard know about him, she may not have legally been able to keep Picard out of his life. But that's a retcon.
Yeah.
On the other hand, they could have had him have a son another way, but unless they did the clone thing again, which they'd already done in Star Trek Nemesis, then it would involve introducing a new character. And that would tend to either that or you don't ever show his mom, and
right.
And not ever showing his mom, it creates a problem because it's like, okay, so why would it? This seems unearned, At least with Beverly, they had something of a romance in the original series, so that can logically be paid off with them having a child. It would seem illogical if, here's Carol Marcus, a woman we've never heard of before, and you've got a son we never heard of before, and you don't want to go to that well too many times.
That's true.
And if they introduced her as an ongoing character, it would take focus away from the main cast, which is the center of this season. And there'd be all kinds of questions like, why would Picard become involved with a woman like this who's going to keep his son secret from him? So I agree. It's a flaw. What they did is flawed. I think some of the alternatives also would be flawed. And I'm kind of at this point willing to just kind of go with it, even though I recognize it's flawed.
Because in the end, it worked pretty well. Like would Beverly, does it make sense for Beverly to have done this? Maybe, maybe not. But in the end, the season works out pretty well regardless. So, yeah. All right, and our next feedback comes on our episode where we talked about the original series episode, The Alternative Factor. And this comes from Robert Osborne on YouTube, who wrote, I really like this episode. I don't have the appropriate background, so I didn't really notice the flaws in the science. I thought it was very classic type sci-fi and fun to watch. Keep up the great work, guys. Really cool podcast. Also love the Doctor Who one you do. Excellent.
Now, I appreciate Robert's feedback, and what would be really funny is if he had sent us a second message from the same account saying, I need to urgently inform you that the other Robert Osborne is an imposter and is built on destroying all life everywhere. Please do not listen to his lies. We must take urgent action against him.
That would have been completely in keeping with the story. That would have been good. Missed opportunities. But thank you anyway, Robert. And then we have another feedback from this one on our just Discovery in general. And this comes from a loyal Catholic on YouTube. That's their screen name. And they write, I didn't realize you stopped reviewing Star Trek Discovery. Honestly, in a way, I don't blame you. But on the other hand, it might be good from the point of view of consistency to review it anyways, since as podcasters / journalists, you should evaluate the Star Trek franchise in its entirety, warts and all.
Well, I'm not a journalist and nobody's paying me to do this. So if you want to pay me to review Star Trek Discovery, I'm open and we can talk price.
There you go. And I did explain in a response to Loyal Catholic that Father Corey and I did do a 1-episode overview review of season 4 of Discovery that we recently released. So in case you haven't seen or heard that one, you can go check that out. But life's too short to spend every week complaining about how awful a show is,
unless you pay me.
unless you pay us. Even then, it'd have to be a pretty good pay raise to do that. Yeah, but thank you for wanting to hear what we have to say regardless. And that does it for our feedback. And now I would like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Star Trek, including Jedediah H., Arthur B., Edward C., Patricia T., and Aaron V. Their generous, tax-deductible donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. And would also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edited this episode. So that's it from us. What did you think of this Enterprise story, Oasis? You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek, or our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or send an email to trek@sqpn.com, or visit our Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. And you can watch The Secrets of Star Trek on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia, where you should always subscribe and always hit the bell to get notifications. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the season premiere of the second season of Strange New World. That's right. It's already here. Until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, and live long and prosper.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, are your sensors calibrated for ghosts?